At roughly 14:30 on the 19th of January, 1943, the transport vessel Myoko Maru was torpedoed by the USS Swordfish, SS-193. Approximately 2 hours later, it became apparent that the transport needed assistance, and so it radioed distress, with the signal reaching two warships operating outside of the Shortlands, the mine layer Hatsutaka and the brand new destroyer Akizuki. At roughly 21:30, the two warships approached the reported position of Myoko Maru, and 10 minutes later, Akizuki spotted a submarine riding on the surface. Initially, there were doubts aboard Akizuki as to whether this was a Japanese or United States submarine, and as a result, Akizuki did not open fire. It was eventually acknowledged that no Japanese submarines were reported to be operating in the area, and that meant this had to be a U.S. submarine, and in fact it was, the USS Nautilus SS-168. At a range of 3,100 meters, Akizuki opened fire with its main battery Type 98 10-centimeter high-angle guns. Nautilus quickly submerged, and Akizuki attempted to close the range. And unknown to Akizuki's crew, at 21:50, Nautilus fired two torpedoes from its bow tubes, and one struck the Akizuki on the starboard side in Boiler Room 1. It ended up blowing a hole in the ship's side that was roughly 8 meters long and 4 meters high, and it damaged a variety of bulkheads, which resulted in extensive flooding in the bow of the ship below the upper deck, flooding the first boiler room, the forward magazines, forward crew spaces, and forward trim tanks. The fire control systems for the main battery and torpedo tubes on the forward end of the ship also went offline as a result of damage from excessive shock. Luckily, the bulkheads separating Boiler Room 1 and Boiler Room 2 held firm, and no flooding was reported in Boiler Room 2. With the destroyer still keeping up the chase, Nautilus fired an additional 3 torpedoes from its bow tubes, and one more would find its mark on Akizuki on the starboard bow, though it failed to detonate. The Japanese would later discover, through a dent in the hull, that the torpedo had struck the ship just underneath turret number 2. A couple of minutes later, Akizuki's helmsman reported that he had lost control of the ship's rudder, and as a result, emergency steering was ordered. Once the ship's course was back under control, Akizuki kept up the chase on Nautilus, forcing Nautilus to zigzag in an attempt to escape the destroyer, which it eventually did. After a few hours, Akizuki gave up the chase, and it began to make its way back to Shortland. Akizuki and Hatsutaka arrived back at Shortland at roughly 14:30 on the 20th of January. They had not located the Myoko Maru, which succumbed to its damage before the vessels arrived. Once moored, it became apparent that Akizuki's survival was remarkable. The vessel's hull was severely strained in the vicinity of the torpedo hit, and it had a forward trim of roughly 2 meters. Its top speed was limited to 20 knots compared to its roughly 34 knots maximum speed. Akizuki suffered 14 dead and 63 wounded. Amongst the wounded was Admiral Kimura, who was removed from the ship as soon as it moored. Akizuki would then depart Shortland on the 30th of January en route for Truk, where it arrived on the 2nd of February. Akizuki moored alongside the fleet repair ship Akashi, which conducted emergency repairs on Akizuki's hull, enabling it to make the voyage back to Japan, where it could be docked for permanent repairs. By the evening of the 10th of March, emergency repairs were completed, and the next day, Akizuki departed Truk en route for Saipan, with Tokyo Maru acting as escort. The two vessels would arrive at Saipan on the 13th of March, and the next day, Akizuki departed Saipan en route for Japan. After sailing roughly 40 nautical miles, Akizuki's keel failed at frame 75, and the ship split in half all the way up to the main deck. Akizuki sagged heavily underneath the bridge structure, and the crew feared that the ship was about to split in half and sink, and as a result, they cancelled their voyage, and Akizuki was towed back to Saipan by the Shoei Maru. The two vessels arrived back at Saipan the next day, and it was quickly acknowledged that Akizuki had no chance of making it back to Japan for permanent repairs unless more emergency repairs were conducted at Saipan. The ship was beached, and its bridge structure, along with turrets number 1 and 2, were removed from the hull. Following that, the main deck at frame 75 was cut, completing the separation of the hull. A small false bow was then fitted to the forward end of boiler room number 1 to make the ship seaworthy again, and a temporary wheelhouse was installed at the forward base of the funnel. Since boiler room 2 was still fully operational, and both of the ship's primary propulsion turbines were undamaged, Akizuki departed Saipan for a second time on the 24th of June 1943 under its own power with 3 escorts. The 4 ships would arrive at Nagasaki, Japan on the 2nd of July, and Akizuki was dry docked 3 days later. The Japanese had 2 paths to choose from in order to conduct the repairs on Akizuki. They could either build an all-new bow for the destroyer, or they could take a bow from another destroyer and attach it to the forward end of Akizuki. Nagasaki just happened to have one of Akizuki's sister ships under construction, the Shimotsuki, which had yet to receive its machinery, and so its construction was sitting in limbo. In order to greatly reduce the repair time of Akizuki, it was decided that Shimotsuki's bow would be cut off from frame 75 and then attached to Akizuki's stern. Akizuki would be under repair for 118 days, of which 57 were spent sitting in dry dock. On the 23rd of October 1943, Akizuki would officially leave dry dock, with repairs on the bow having been completed. While the ship was undergoing this lengthy repair time, the Japanese took the opportunity to modify the ship's loadout. The foremast would receive adequate alterations to mount the Type 21 General Surface Search Radar antenna. The aftermost Type 94 high-angle fire control system was removed and replaced with a triple-mount Type 96 25mm machine gun. The twin-mount Type 96 anti-aircraft positions located just ahead of the torpedo tubes would also be replaced with triple mounts. Finally, the ship would also receive a hydrophone set, which was installed in its lower hull. For the last week of October, Akizuki would run sea trials outside of Nagasaki to confirm that the repairs conducted were adequate, which was confirmed by the 31st of October when the ship departed Nagasaki for Sasebo, having been reassigned to Destroyer Division 61. As for Shimotsuki, Nagasaki would reconstruct the ship's bow, which was completed by December 1943, and on the 31st of March 1944, the destroyer was commissioned into the Navy. With that having been said, there is nothing more to add on to this topic for today. So, if you have learned something new in this video, why not leave a like and a comment down below, and have a wonderful day.